Let's talk about Taiwan. Why Taiwan? Because in this current war between the United States and Iran, and yes, Israel is also involved, but for a moment, let's look at the broader picture, doesn't happen in a vacuum. When we look at the big picture and zoom out, it turns out that the struggle happening now in the Middle East can be seen as just one front within a much broader global struggle. It's the new Cold War between the United States and China. To understand how everything fits into the global puzzle, we need to break the system down into several key factors. That way, we can see how our little battle, which actually is rather big to us, but still is relatively small, is actually just one piece of the global chessboard of the great powers. So, let's talk for a moment about what the main strategy of the United States has been for the last decade. The idea was what's called the pivot to Asia. The thought was to shift the focus of attention, resources, and military forces from the Middle East, which had greatly occupied the United States' attention since the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even since the 70s regarding oil production and supplies, to the Indo-Pacific region, meaning towards China. The ultimate American goal is to halt the intensification and spread of Chinese influence, because the Chinese are the ones threatening the United States in the long term as a superpower. And here we must bring Iran into the picture. As long as the Middle East is burning with new drama every few years, or every few days, if we look at things since October 7th, and as long as the United States constantly needs to invest massive resources to stabilize this region, always putting an aircraft carrier here, dedicating diplomatic attention there, sending in diplomats because they're fighting now, the Houthis, the Hezbollah, problems in Syria, problems here, problems there. As long as the United States constantly has to deal with these trivialities compared to China, China actually enjoys calmness. From Beijing's perspective, Iran is a strategic asset, partly because it pins the Americans down to a region that doesn't matter as much to China. So great, the Iranians keep the Americans busy and everything is fine. That's even without talking about a war scenario. What would happen if the US and China went to war? The Middle East itself would start to rumble as well, with Iran and other people that would suddenly cause two regional wars simultaneously, one with Iran and one with China, and suddenly the energy supply of the entire West from the Persian Gulf would be undermined and disrupted. It would be very bad if that happened, and if such a war in the Middle East is perceived as something inevitable that will happen sooner or later, then maybe it's better to choose the timing. In other words, don't risk doing it while attention is needed against China, but do it now when Iran is weak and when the chance that China will also choose to escalate the arena is lower. In their eyes, the risk still exists, but it's relatively low. Timing, as they say, is everything. In recent years, we've truly seen the consolidation of a sort of axis operating jointly to challenge the American hegemony. China provides Iran with a critical economic lifeline. Despite the American sanctions on Iran, China purchases Iranian oil through various other methods and does so quite cheaply. This flow of money allows Iran to maintain its economy and its military programs despite pressure from the West. In return, China receives a cheap and stable energy source that doesn't depend on trade routes that the West completely controls. Additionally, Iran's geopolitical location makes it a key point in the Belt and Road Initiative. This is a Chinese plan whose whole point is to connect China to Europe in terms of trade routes, to control the trade routes between China, Europe, and also Africa. But let's talk more about Europe. Maybe we'll expand on this initiative another time. Overall, yes, it's an initiative that isn't offensive, as in an attack, but it does threaten the United States because this initiative gives China influence. Superpowers have fought for influence through control of trade routes throughout history. Think of the Roman Punic Wars, the Napoleonic Wars, and so on. It has always been that way, and it probably always will be. So the United States is fighting against this initiative. Israel is also part of this story, and it is also connected to the visit that happened here with India's Modi and the IMEC. But we spoke about that just a few weeks ago, so we won't go into it now. Another thing about China is that it is a country that is very thirsty for oil. Without oil, there's no energy. They are not like the United States, which can simply pump oil from its own territory. China must have an external source of oil. This connects us to another event that happened on the other side of the world, but it's still related. Remember that time a while ago when the United States abducted the president of Venezuela? Remember that? Both that move and what's happening with Iran are all part of a broader move related to China. Venezuela isn't just another country in South America. It holds the largest proven oil reserves in the world. And this is exactly where China, Russia, and also Iran enter the picture. They're doing to the United States exactly what the United States does to them close to their country, right? The United States sends all sorts of branches, builds bases around Iran, creates connections with China's rivals like Japan, South Korea, Australia, creating a choke ring around them, or Ukraine in the case of Russia. So, they also try to do the same thing to the United States. That is, to gain influence in the United States' backyard, its neighborhood, through support for Venezuela, Cuba, and so on. It's all part of the same axis. For example, Iran sent oil tankers to Venezuela. It sent technicians to Venezuela's poor refineries. It sent military equipment to Venezuela, all right under the Americans' noses. And the two countries helped each other a lot. They also taught each other how to bypass the sanctions the Americans impose. And the Chinese and Russians also played this game. Yes, China was the main customer for oil from Venezuela and also from Iran. And because these are countries under sanctions, China could buy it cheaply. How nice for China. So when the United States takes down Venezuela, and hopefully also Iran, when it takes down these countries, it chokes China in terms of allies. It chokes China in terms of who it can buy cheap energy from. And as mentioned, energy for China isn't just a recommendation. They must have it to progress. And I'll reveal something else to you. What's happening with the drug cartels in Mexico? I don't know if you've heard, but in recent weeks there have been assassinations of senior figures in the cartels. And there's almost a semi-war of sorts. Well, I don't want to say a war, but there's a lot of drama. And it turns out China is part of this whole story, with the cartels that smuggle piles of dangerous drugs into the United States, which kill Americans, weaken the United States from within, and distract the United States from dealing with China, because they also have to deal with Mexico, Venezuela, and Iran. So the Chinese hope was that when you connect all of these, you see a clear strategy. China and Russia don't need to fight the United States in a frontal and dangerous confrontation. They create separate points of friction that constantly require the United States to react. I mentioned Iran, Venezuela, the cartels, and those are just examples. By the way, I should mention China and Russia are like friends because they're both enemies of the United States. You know, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But they are not truly friends. China and Russia don't love each other. But that's a topic for another time. And there's another important issue, the issue of deterrence and psychology. This international puzzle is largely built on the demonstration of power, the demonstration of determination, and the way the United States deals with threats. If the United States shows weakness regarding Iran, or if it shows hesitance or an inability to protect freedom of navigation and trade routes, this is interpreted in China as an opportunity. Look, the United States is hesitant. Look, the United States is weak. We can take Taiwan. That is, after all, what China wants so badly, to take Taiwan. I remind you that China sees Taiwan as a rogue province that should be a part of it. This is something that has remained in China since its civil war between the communists and the nationalists, which the communists won. This war was around World War II, and the central goal for China under the current regime is to reconquer Taiwan. That is the reason that a demonstration of determination or significant action against Iran is intended not only to shape the Middle East, but also to send a deterrent and direct message to China regarding what the Americans are willing to do when red lines are crossed. So what's left for China essentially? Venezuela is out. Iran is on its way out. All they're left with is Russia. And Russia itself is also in trouble. As mentioned, Russia and China are not really friends. But before we finish, let's mention the other side. Many people think that the fact that the United States at this very moment is busy with Iran and is burning a large part of its weapons, interceptor stocks, ammunition, this means that right now in the coming days or weeks is an excellent time for China to attack Taiwan. So, we will just have to wait and see what happens in that regard. Also, as I remind you, China has a surplus stockpile of oil which it purchased over the last year, and it's possible that it was going to use that for an attack on Taiwan. But right now, due to the shortages from the Middle East, it has to make a choice if to use it in the very near future and attack Taiwan, or to let it burn out for their regular daily use. We will have to wait and see. But one more interesting point is that all of the Chinese training flights in the Straits of Taiwan have ceased. Whether that's because there's something going on or because they're conserving fuel, I don't know, but it's an interesting point. Anyways, thank you all for joining, and if you enjoyed this, like, share, subscribe, comment below on your thoughts, and remember, we here at Netivyah are doing our best to support Israel and support you, so pray for us and support us, and God bless you all. Shalom.